Hey everyone, it's Wednesday, July 30th. I'm Benit Brach here in the CBC Vancouver newsroom. Here's what's happening this afternoon. Well, brace for sweltering weather today. Heat warnings have been issued for some areas of BC. So that includes much of BC's interior and up north. There's the Okanagan Valley, Fraser Canyon, South Thompson boundary, and West Kootenays regions. Temperatures are expected to reach 35 to 38 degrees. The province says risks are greater for seniors, people who live alone, and it's important to check in on family and your neighbors. The community in Lytton is once again facing a wildfire threat. The Cantilever Bar fire is burning out of control around 10 kilometers south of the village. This was discovered on Monday. It spread quickly because of how hot and dry conditions are. So far, it's estimated to be about 460 hectares.
In my conversations with the mayor and certainly with the chief and past weeks and months, deep concern. I think there's an awful lot of work that has been done over the course of the last number of years in wildfire mitigation work, but there were reports of ashes falling in Lytton last night as an example. And so for those that have been working hard to rebuild their homes, those who are looking to continue to come home over the next number of years, certainly a lot of concerns that I can imagine.
The wildfire is suspected to be human-caused. Evacuation alerts over the fire, they've been imposed by the Thompson-Nicola Regional District and 3 local First Nations communities. Okay, and some relief as BC's government has canceled a tsunami advisory that was issued after a massive earthquake struck off the coast of Russia yesterday. This was one of the strongest earthquakes ever recorded. The U.S.-based National Tsunami Warning Center says it was a magnitude 8.8 earthquake. You can see just some of that damage that was done in Russia there. Authorities reported small tsunami waves in Japan, Hawaii, and the U.S. West Coast. Here in BC, residents were urged to avoid the shorelines and beaches due to those possibly strong waves and currents. At the end, waves less than 30 centimeters arrived last night in Haida Gwaii and the west coast of Vancouver Island. Authorities in Japan, Russia, and Hawaii have all downgraded tsunami warnings. And when it comes to the difference between advisory and warning, an advisory means significant inundation is not expected for areas, but coastal zones could see, that risk of strong currents. Meanwhile, a warning is the highest level, which warns that residents should move away from that water immediately. And Premier David Eby is celebrating BC's first LNG shipments from Canada to Asia. He says it comes at a pivotal time as Canada aims to become more independent amid ongoing trade tensions with the U.S.
The LNG that comes from this site is 60% lower carbon than the average LNG plant in the world. It is 40% better in terms of carbon content than the best plants in the world, which means that when we're shipping to Japan, to Korea, to Malaysia, to China, it means that these countries are able to meaningfully reduce their carbon pollution and their carbon footprint, and that is very meaningful in these markets.
The project was built in partnership with the Haisla Nation and other Indigenous communities. Meanwhile, critics have said that LNG projects are likely to drive up BC's carbon emissions even more, pushing BC further away from its emissions targets. And you are updated this afternoon. You're watching CBC News BC. I'm Benit Brach. Stay with us. BC Today is coming up next.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. The BC government has cancelled a tsunami advisory that was issued after a massive underwater earthquake that struck off the coast of Russia. It was one of the strongest ever recorded. We'll bring you the latest info. And the Bank of Canada held its interest rate at 2.75% today, citing resilience in the economy despite the ongoing global trade war brought on by the U.S. But what does it all mean for you? And ahead of the Vancouver Pride Parade this weekend, we'll find out what pride means to you. I'm Amy Bell in for Michelle Elliott, and this is BC Today. And we have been hearing about the powerful earthquake that hit off of Kamchatka, Russia at about 4:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time yesterday afternoon. It reached a magnitude of 8.8 on the Richter scale, which makes it one of the strongest earthquakes ever recorded. Tsunami concerns quickly spread to Russia, Japan, Hawaii, and to us here on the West Coast. But waves of less than 30 centimeters arrived last night in Haida Gwaii and the west coast of Vancouver Island. And the tsunami advisory for BC's coast has now been lifted. For more on what happened, I'm joined today by Collin Paul. He's a seismic analyst for Natural Resources Canada, and we've reached him in Victoria. Hi, Collin. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So what can you tell us about this earthquake in Russia yesterday?
So as you mentioned, it was a magnitude 8.8 earthquake off the coast of Kamchatka, Russia. Being this magnitude, it's considered a great earthquake, one of the largest earthquakes we see around the world. It's actually the largest event we've seen in the last 14 years. And this occurred along the Aleutian-Kuril-Kamchatka Arc, which is part of the Ring of Fire in the Pacific Ocean.
Well, and then how can you explain then how, an earthquake originating from Russia can impact the Pacific coastal land masses located in that Pacific Ring of Fire, such as we are here in the West Coast?
So when this earthquake occurred, the motion of the fault actually shifted the ocean bottom upwards. And when that happened, it moved the entire column of water to the surface, and that created a large wave. And this is very different from the wind waves we typically see on the ocean. This is the entire column of water moving across the ocean. And because it's such a large mass of water and so much energy involved, it can actually, like I said, cross the entire ocean.
And as we saw yesterday, there were tsunami warnings and alerts for, millions of people across the world. And our tsunami advisory here for the BC coast has been canceled. But what is the system that we use here in BC for advisory and then for evacuation if it ever comes to that?
So we work on a tiered system. So we receive alerts from the National Tsunami Warning Center based in the United States, and they watch the entire Pacific Ocean and other places around the world. What we do is we take their information and we pass those alerts through EMCR-BC, Emergency Management Climate Readiness BC, and they talk to the local governments and they'll decide what to do from there. Primarily what happens is we'll go underneath initially a watch. And what that is that something has happened that may be tsunamigenic. So we should be preparing to react. We don't need to react right away. And then next is we will get an alert either of an advisory or a warning. What happened with BC in this case was we went underneath an advisory. And so that means we didn't expect wave heights to exceed about 1/3 of a meter.
And we've received reports that say the waves, reached about 20 to 30 centimeters high in BC. But, this very well could be a different story at a different time. What should you do if you are alerted of a tsunami on the way to where you happen to be? What do people need to know?
So they need to know that the primary thing is to move away from the water. If you're on the shoreline, move up to high land, or if you can't move up, you move away. So in this case, we put the advisory, so people that were on, say, the beaches late in that evening, they should have been moving away from the water just in case. And then in a warning situation, such as in Tofino, you'll hear tsunami sirens that will alert you that you need to move away quickly.
And do you think that here in BC we are, adequately, prepared to deal with a large tsunami?
We do have the systems in place. resulting from the 1964 Alaska earthquake that caused a tsunami that did damage homes in Port Alberni, actually swept them off their foundations, that put us into place to have a rigid system to pass these alerts between the different levels of government and try to get the information to people correctly and quickly.
And are there any effects that we could, expect to see as a result of this earthquake in Russia? There may be aftershocks that could impact people living in BC. Is that something we need to keep watching out for?
So with an event of this size, there's always the chance of a large aftershock. So far, there haven't been any aftershocks large enough to be tsunamigenic that would affect BC. But as always, Earthquakes Canada, the National Tsunami Warning Center, and Emergency Management Climate Readiness BC will always be monitoring the situation. And if it arrives that a new alert needs to come out, people will be informed if that becomes the case.
And then in terms of where we're situated, how vulnerable, are we sort of in the large scheme of things? The BC coastline, sits over a large seismic fault line. We constantly hear that we need to be prepared, for the big one. And then we see a big one of this magnitude happening somewhere. And I think that gets anxiety up for a lot of people.
So this is the type of earthquake that we do expect to see in our Cascadia subduction zone. It is a thrusting earthquake that can produce tsunamis. And so while the government is prepared and we have these systems in place, like I said, we have tsunami sirens on the coast in populated places. We have warnings that go to people over different communication methods. We still need everyone to be prepared and know what to do. So if, say, you are visiting a coastal area, you should know what the tsunami evacuation route is.
Paul, I know that you and your colleagues have been very busy the last few hours and will continue to be so. So I thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you again for having me.
That was Collin Paul, a seismic analyst for Natural Resources Canada, and we reached him in Sydney. This is BC Today, and it is 12:13. Yesterday, we talked to BC Seniors advocate Dan Levitt about a report he published detailing how the province's long-term care facilities are faring in response to increasing demand. The report said the lack of available beds leads to long wait times, and in turn, the responsibility shifts to family caregivers. Wendy Johnston from Family Caregivers of BC was on the early edition this morning to give us her takeaway from the report.
While individuals are waiting for long-term care, their caregivers are supporting them, holding up the healthcare system at expense of their own well-being. That's really what strikes me. And so while we're hoping for system reform, we're hoping for more long-term care beds, caregivers can't wait for that. They need the support now while they're waiting. When we see or hear from caregivers who are waiting for long-term care for their loved one, what we're hearing is often a system that just can't meet their needs.
And yesterday we asked how gaps in long-term care have impacted you and your family. Here are a couple of your emails. Barbara wrote, "I'm a baby boomer. I have no issues with my health currently. In the future, if I'm diagnosed with dementia, I will not put my daughters or the system through what is going on now. I will choose MAID or another means. I watched my grandma go through this for 10 years, lived in a hospital bed for 2 years before getting into long-term care." I appreciate the thoughts and for everybody that called in on such an important subject. And let's turn now to a key decision made by the Bank of Canada amid trade tensions with the United States. The central bank is holding its key lending rate unchanged at 2.75%. This is the third consecutive time the rate has been held steady. Governor Tiff Macklem says uncertainty over tariffs and unpredictable U.S. policy requires flexibility.
There's also uncertainty about how businesses and individuals in Canada and the United States will adapt to this new trade environment. The increases we've seen in U.S. effective tariff rates are less than what was threatened, but they are still outside post-war historical experience. But the unusual degree of uncertainty does mean we have to put more weight on the risks. We're looking at over a shorter horizon than usual, and we are ready to respond to new information.
So, what does this mean for you? Will the interest rate impact your decision to buy or sell real estate? Do you have any questions about interest rates and mortgages as a result? Call us at 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, pound 690 on your cell phone. You can email bctoday@cbc.ca or leave a comment on our TikTok Live. And to help us understand what this means for mortgage rates, home buyers, and sellers across BC, we're joined by Randy Ryalls, managing broker at Royal LePage Sterling Realty. Randy, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you, Amy. Nice to be here with you.
It's great to have you. So can you explain perhaps briefly what the Bank of Canada interest rate is and what today's announcement signals to you?
Well, the Bank of Canada rate affects short-term interest rates. So things like line of credit or variable rate mortgages are affected by that rate. The long-term interest rate is more affected by the bond yield. So it doesn't really have an effect on sort of the 3 or 4 or 5 year interest rate that a mortgage holder would have.
Okay.
But it does affect, your shorter term debt, right?
And then how does the interest rate matter, I guess, for the average homeowner or buyer? Has this decision, impacted mortgage affordability and qualifications in BC now?
It doesn't really affect that too much.
Okay.
Most mortgage holders are in fixed term mortgages, but for those that are in, variable rate mortgages that were looking for a little relief from a rate cut, they're going to have to wait to see that probably a little later on in the year, if at all. Mm-hmm. So, it can affect their decision making for sure.
And of course, here in the Lower Mainland especially, but really across the province, we can either talk about weather or we can talk about real estate, and everybody has an interest in it somehow. In your opinion, is now a good time to buy or sell a home in the Lower Mainland and really across the province?
Well, our market has really shifted from being a very strong seller's market during the COVID years and following that for a period of time. But, times have changed. And so, now we have lots of inventory in the marketplace. In Greater Vancouver, we're sitting at a little over 17,000 listings, which is higher than usual. And so there's lots of selection for a buyer to pick from. There's much less urgency. They've got time to make a decision. So, from that perspective, you're in a much better position if you are a buyer in today's marketplace. Mm-hmm. It's a little tougher if you're a seller. You've got much more competition, and so it takes a little bit longer than it did a couple of years ago. But overall, we do have some balance in the marketplace, especially in townhouses and condos, a little less so in detached homes. But it's still going on out there, and so that's good. It hasn't. The real estate market hasn't dried up by any stretch of the imagination.
We'd love to have people call in and ask you questions, share their thoughts on the interest rates, how it impacts the real estate market, and how they're feeling about it. So call us 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can also email bctoday@cbc.ca and comment on our TikTok Live at CBC British Columbia. We are with Randy Ryalls from, he's managing broker at Royal LePage Sterling Realty. What sort of advice are you, or would you give perhaps to buyers that are facing, high interest rates and high prices right now?
Well, affordability is still an issue, especially in the big centers like Vancouver and Toronto, where everything is very expensive. So, you do have to make wise decisions. I think you want to buy within your within your ability. So that's important. Make sure that you are doing the due diligence that you should do, that now you have the time and the space to be able to do that. So now as a buyer, you can be much more cautious and do much more due diligence than, in the past when it was a much more favorable market for the sellers. So,
And, as we know, the sort of political turmoil or temperature in the U.S. has had a huge impact on us here in British Columbia, in Canada, worldwide, and obviously it's all tied into the interest rates and threats of tariffs. Have you seen that direct correlation between tensions with the U.S. impacting the real estate market at all? Are people more interested in staying here and looking perhaps in other areas of the province or the country?
Well, yeah, that instability really affects the buyer psyche in the marketplace. And, having that uncertainty about the future is, it's difficult to make a big financial decision when you're not sure what's going to happen down the road. And so, we've seen sales in Greater Vancouver, actually all over the country, at much lower transactional levels than we've seen, in quite some time. So it is affecting how people think about it and whether or not they want to take the risk of jumping into a large purchase decision. So yeah, it does affect how they think about things.
Now, what about people I always think, for people whose mortgages are up for renewal, just depending on the timing of when that is, you're sort of beholden to what the interest rates are. Do you recommend that people, perhaps go for a variable rate and take their chances, or is it, a fixed rate, something that you would perhaps advise people to? I know variable rates can be difficult for people's, stomachs, but, a lot of people do choose them. I guess, what are the benefits and negatives of each?
Well, typically, although we've seen this reverse, but, historically, variable rate mortgages are probably going to be a little bit less than the going sort of fixed term rates are. So, if you can stomach it, you can probably save yourself a little bit of money with a variable rate mortgage. But it's a very personal decision. And so people need to decide how much stability and how much security, that they want to have with respect to their output every month. And so it's just a very personal decision for everybody.
What are you hearing from your clients right now? What have their biggest concerns been, say, in the past year?
Again, it's that uncertainty around, for some people, employment. If you're in a sector that might be affected by U.S. tariffs, those people are not likely going out there and transacting on something like a home or a big purchase. So, I think we've seen a lot of people kind of taking a wait and see attitude to try to see, what in the world is going to happen with respect to the U.S. and trade and all of that kind of stuff. So it does affect those guys. And, for others that have more stability, if you have a sort of a long-term job in a sector that isn't really affected by that, then, I think that they're feeling a little more confident about being able to go out and make things happen. You certainly have way more selection than you had in the past. See lots of buyers in the marketplace transacting that are subject to sale of their property, which was impossible to do a couple of years ago. So it does have an effect, especially on what kind of work that you do and what kind of sector you're in.
Looking ahead, I'm well aware you don't have a crystal ball, but given your past experience, looking ahead, what do you think we're going to see perhaps, in the housing market and with the interest rates, maybe, in the next 6 or even 12 months?
Well, our predictions are we're starting to see some signs that the decline is shifting and slowing. So that's good news. We are still at transactional levels that are significantly below the 10-year average for sure. And we're down, probably 25% from a year ago in June in terms of the number of transactions, not prices, but certainly in the number of transactions. So, it is starting to feel like it's shifting a little bit. Our numbers here at our brokerage for July have been quite promising. And so people are definitely getting out there. We're seeing good numbers of people attending open houses and that sort of thing. So we know there's lots of buyers in the marketplace, but they have the luxury of really being able to take their time and make the right decision. And so, the sense of urgency has drained out of the marketplace, and so it takes a little bit longer to sell, and buyers can really take their time. So it is a nice change, actually, because it's a much easier market to work in.
Well, I was going to say it's nice to see people not having that sort of fierce mentality where they have to bid overpriced with no inspections and just hope for the best. It gives people a chance to perhaps think through such a major decision. I'm curious in terms of when we have this instability, in the markets, in the world. Are people more inclined to be looking at, a single home, single family home? Are they looking more at townhouses and condominiums? Do we see anything sort of playing favorites right now?
I don't think so. During COVID, it was much different. We were seeing sort of a migration from small condos to more single family houses or townhouses where people wanted more space. But we don't really see that happening right now. I think the market overall is fairly balanced in terms of what people want. I think it is really driven by price more than anything else. Single family homes are still quite expensive in Greater Vancouver and the Fraser Valley. So I do think that probably is the driving factor for most people.
And we just got an email in from one of our listeners, from Joanne. It says, when you think of the rates to borrow for a home, the way the cost of housing rose so quickly is the real problem. David Eby just said this morning and explained what happened in the housing markets after developers wrote to the federal and provincial government. His government imposed the foreign tax, empty home tax, and absolutely no intention to change it because developers with foreign interests threw the housing market into chaos, where right now in Vancouver, there is one of these builds left empty. I agree with the Premier when he said the foreign interest needs to pay taxes to support health and infrastructure when they use our housing market to invest their money. Australia moved to foreign ownership, and I agree that if you don't live, work, and play in the country, you own your property, then there has to be a mechanism to support the safety and stability, and this is taxes. It is a lot different paying 4+ interest on a home of $500K opposed to the average price of $1 million. Youth today feel hopeless to ever own a home, and they will own a shoebox or a condo where the strata insurance and property tax is horribly expensive. Thank you for that, Joanne. And Randy, that does bring up one thing that we see time and time again when we discuss real estate here. It's a lot of strong emotions, a lot of people feeling that that the price of any homes here in Vancouver or Lower Mainland are never going to become more manageable. Is this something you grapple with in your business as well?
Well, it is difficult to understand how, somebody in their 20s or 30s will ever be able to save enough money if they, have just sort of a regular kind of a job to be able to purchase here in Greater Vancouver. But, that said, maybe they need to look a little bit further afield and maybe, for their first one or two purchases, they're, in the interior somewhere where it's more affordable. But it is hard to understand how sort of a regular person with a regular wage is going to save $500,000 or $1 million in order to be able to afford $1.5 million house. So that's tough to figure out for sure.
It is, and that's probably a segment for another day on the show. Randy, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me on, Amy.
Randy Ryalls is managing broker at Royal LePage Sterling Realty. This is BC Today on CBC. We're on Radio 1, CBC Television, and live streaming on our website, cbc.ca/BC, YouTube at CBC Vancouver, and on the CBC News app. And speaking of CBC News, it is now time for the 12:30 news with Robert Zimmerman.
Good afternoon. The provincial government says it's working with the RCMP to create a new unit to fight human trafficking. Public Safety Minister Nina Krieger says a new unit will have 12 officers divided into 2 teams. One will be dedicated to providing specialized training, while the other will carry out investigations. The BC Wildfire Service says the Cantilever Bar fire south of Lytton has grown to about 4.6 square kilometers. The blaze was discovered Monday and has spread quickly in hot, dry conditions. Evacuation alerts remain in place for a number of nearby properties. And as we heard on the show, the tsunami advisory that covered much of the BC coastline after a massive underwater earthquake off Russia has been cancelled. People had been told to stay away from coastal areas. Officials say the highest waves reported overnight at 27 centimeters were at Langara Island, on the northern end of Haida Gwaii. And now the forecast. Heat warnings continue for many sections of the province, with highs close to 40 degrees in some areas. On the north coast, a mix of sun and cloud this afternoon with a high of 19. Highs up to 31 with some sun and cloud in the Peace. In the central interior, including Prince George, lots of sunshine with a high of 32. Highs around 33 with a mix of sun and cloud this afternoon in the Kootenays. In the southern interior, sunny breaks with a high of 36. And for Metro Vancouver, Greater Victoria, and the Fraser Valley, mainly sunny this afternoon with highs in the low 30s. That's your CBC News update from Vancouver.
Thank you very much, Rob. You can now go and join the second half of the CBC Musical Nooners. Still a half an hour left.
Great. Thank you,
Get
Amy.
out there. Enjoy the sunshine.
I'm off. All right.
Thanks, Rob. And there's lots more on the day's top stories on the afternoon show in your region. Today's key interest rate decision by the Bank of Canada comes, but we will have lots more with Gloria Makarenko here on the coast.
It's Gloria Makarenko here, and I hope you can join us for On the Coast later this afternoon. You know, all week on the show, we have been talking about housing. We've got a series running called Built to Last, and we want to know if Canada can build its way out of the housing crisis. So this afternoon, we're going to get a developer's perspective on the issue. Michael Audain of Polygon is going to join us to talk about the pressures faced by the companies that actually build new housing. Also, we'll talk about the latest Bank of Canada's decision about the lending rate and just what that means for people's household financing. So I hope you can join us for those stories and many more between 3 and 6 for On the Coast.
Gloria, thank you. And you can hear On the Coast on CBC Radio 1 here in Metro Vancouver and anywhere on the CBC News app. And every year, communities across BC celebrate Pride in June, July, and August. As Premier David Eby said, it's a time for all of us to recognize and celebrate the many victories gained by the 2S LGBTQIA+ people over the decades. This Sunday, the Vancouver Pride Parade is expected to draw tens of thousands of people from right across the province. Kelowna held its first ever Pride Month this year with events like Pets for Pride, and there was Pride roller disco in the Alberni Valley. But Pride isn't just about the events. It can be deeply personal as well. So we want to hear from you. What does Pride mean to you this year? And what are some of the Pride events that you look forward to in your community? Call us at 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, pound 690 on your cell phone. And you can email us bctoday@cbc.ca and leave a comment on our TikTok live at CBC British Columbia. Joining us now in studio is Alex Ash, Programs and Engagement Manager for Qmunity, BC's Queer, Trans, and Two-Spirit Resource Centre. Thank you so much for coming in to hang out with us, Ash.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
So BC's Queer, Trans, and Two-Spirit community is very diverse. Or Alex, sorry. Ash is your last name.
No worries.
The community is very diverse. Do you have a sense of how people are sort of feeling about Pride this year?
I think obviously, as you said, it's very diverse. So I think that a lot of people are probably having mixed emotions, I would say. Obviously, it's a huge time for celebration. For a lot of people, it's often the only time people can maybe come together, especially in more rural regions. But obviously, there's been a lot of worry with people feeling potentially worried to come out to events and that kind of thing as well. So I think a mixed review, but I think overall very hopeful and very positive. And obviously, Qmunity has been running Pride events since actually the end of May, and they go until the end of September. So it's a very fruitful Pride season, and it runs all over the province, which is wonderful.
But that must be difficult this year, especially when we are seeing so much, turmoil in many places around the world. We also have a U.S. president that has ignited a lot of hatred towards members of the gay and trans communities. How are you processing that while still being able to celebrate and revel in the joy that is Pride?
That's a great question. I feel like the turmoil kind of goes hand in hand sometimes with the joy. We really have been fighting for our rights for a long time, and that will continue. We've been here before. We'll be here again. I think, unfortunately, is what's happening at the moment. And ultimately, we have to kind of come together, and closer to home as well. This isn't just across the border, and so I think being mindful of that as well, and acknowledging that we have power in unity, and there's so many people are coming together and standing alongside us, and that is also very important, to have allies, to have folks who see you and believe you and acknowledge who you are in your existence.
And how important is that allyship? And I guess in terms of how people can support and be true allies in a time like this?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. I think allyship comes in a lot of forms, but it isn't performative, and that's really the key here. If you come out to a Pride celebration if you came out in June, if you are going to Vancouver Pride this weekend, that's amazing. And what else are you doing throughout the year to support queer, trans, and two-spirit people in your lives, or people that you see? How can you show up and stand alongside us throughout the year, not just during Pride season?
And that's such an important point, because it does attract a lot of attention, and we get, so many people sort of get wrapped up in the celebratory nature of Pride, and it is incredible. The Pride Parade is incredibly fun and filled with so many wonderful people, but it does have to move past that one day, and it won't always be celebratory and fun. It can be incredibly difficult. We do have one call that's come in from Cody in Trail. Hi, Cody.
Hello, Amy. Hello, Alex. How are you guys today?
Doing very well. How are you?
You look very well in blue, Amy. I see you right now I'm watching on CBC, and I see you in blue. So you're wearing my favorite color today.
Wow. Thank you. It's one of my favorites as well, Cody.
My pleasure.
How are you feeling about any of the Pride events around you?
I kind of feel like that Pride, not like it shouldn't just only be about sexual orientation or sexual preference. It should be designed more to be inclusive and more to include not to judge people, because like the thing is like, I mean, and I understand, like, with everything that's been going on in Vancouver, like with the Lapu tragedy and stuff, like we need to basically step up to the plate and be more inclusive and less judgmental of LGBT and trans and the two spirits, because I kind of feel like if people say enough negative things, then we don't we're going to live in a world where we're just going to be made to think we're garbage because people are going to say stuff.
Right, Cody.
And people have teased me before because I have scoliosis and called me Quasimodo when I was 12 years old.
And I'm so sorry to hear that, Cody. And I do thank you for calling in from Trail today. And Alex, he does touch on that we do need to be more exclusive, and we do need to make sure we're not being judgmental to all people. But at the same time, I do think it is important to have these celebrations that are specifically for the LGBTQ plus Two-Spirit communities, because I think there needs to be a time to celebrate and to put focus and to lift up a specific group at times.
Absolutely. I think that, as an underrepresented group, obviously with a multitude of different intersections within that, it's really important to hold space. But I do think that the caller, when they were talking about being inclusive, they are spaces for everyone. There isn't, no one stands there and looks at any kind of ID card for you to attend Pride. It's for families. It's for people to see themselves reflected. Oftentimes, Pride or some of these events are the only time that people can kind of be their true selves. Have the gender identity or feel good in their gender expression and be able to sort of arrive in that place and say, yeah, I'm here and I feel good and be seen and celebrated for who they are. And I do think that that's important. And obviously there with large events comes risk. And so that's another obvious, that is an issue as well, of course.
And that is an issue that has been brought up since the Lapu Day Fest, and it was an incredible tragedy that has had a deep impact on the Filipino community, on the Vancouver community, and it does cast a shadow at times on all these public events that we typically we don't worry about that aspect so much. We go and we celebrate with our whole hearts, and we don't necessarily worry about the safety. And we're sort of seeing that we have to be on a few different levels.
Absolutely, and I was actually present there and have been in contact with the Filipino Society, and it also deeply impacted some of our own community members as well, drag performers, and members of the Korean trans and Two-Spirit community. And so, yes, obviously those ramifications are being felt, and I think that we still owe it to ourselves to show up and support one another, not necessarily just at Pride, but kind of, as I said, throughout the year. And making sure that we're doing all that we can. That's what at Qmunity, obviously, we kind of support all folks throughout the year through programs and engagement. And so we want to make sure that people feel seen and respected.
As I mentioned at the top of the show, Kelowna held its first ever Pride month this year. How did that go?
So I had a colleague who attended, and a lot of some folks from Vancouver also went as well. And I did hear from a wonderful drag performer called Frida Wales that it went really well, and she was really impressed with the organization. And they did a lot of different events. And I think that we're seeing, in a way, it shouldn't all fall on the Pride Societies to do a lot of that outreach and that work throughout the year.
Absolutely.
But ultimately, due to a lot of the sort of funding cuts and restrictions we're seeing in the sector, a lot of those Pride Societies are having to take on a lot of the labor. And so in a way, it's wonderful because they're putting on lots of events and bringing the community together. And because they're in that local community, they should be, but they should be more well-resourced, and they should have the capacity to do that.
Yeah, and it is, as you said, it's wonderful to see these events, being held in so many different areas around the province, more rural areas, so people don't have to travel to a big city to be exposed to it. Are there other firsts or some other sort of signs of progress that you're seeing across the province?
Yeah, absolutely. I was actually lucky enough to attend Squamish's first Pride Parade. They'd had a small festival, and we actually marched for the first time, and they invited us. They invited Qmunity to join them, and that was a really, really special day because the whole community came together, and it was really wonderful to make those connections. And I think that really thinking about rural regions and the way that Two-Spirit, queer and trans identities are actually really, really different. And we can't sort of just think about the way that we are in big cities, because ultimately it's really, really a different ballgame. I spent quite a lot of time in New Brunswick in queer nonprofit work, and again, very rural regions and similar trends where, the issues and things we're seeing in those areas are quite different. A lot of people said during an activation in Squamish and further afield in even more remote regions, they just want to feel safe, for example, going to get a drink in a bar or something like that. And I think we forget that in the Lower Mainland, and it's really important that we don't forget that, because people need to be seen and be able to live authentically regardless of where in the province they live.
Exactly, and to have that safety and just that openness around them. We do have a call in from Patricia in Caslow. Hi, Patricia.
Hi.
So what does Pride mean to you?
Well, this year it means I have two small children, and they can express themselves and be themselves authentically without self-hate or shame.
I think that is a wonderful thing to instill in your children. And in Caslow, have there been any events that you've been able to enjoy?
Yeah, we had some events back in June where they painted the sidewalk, and it was one of the busiest Pride events I've seen in recent history. So I was really proud of that.
Oh, well, that sounds wonderful. Patricia, thanks so much for calling in. And Alex, that was something I wanted to touch base with you as well, just that those changing attitudes that we might have now towards how we discuss gender and expression with our children. How are we seeing that sort of play out in terms of where we are in terms of acceptance and with society?
Yeah, I think, obviously it's been really tricky the last couple of years, but we can't stop thinking about the progress we've made to get here, and, the conversations that are happening with families and youth growing up, realizing that they can actually just express themselves, and, striving for a time where maybe we don't have to come out in the same way. That's been a huge sort of shift in the landscape where people could just decide and also have room for change. And that's something that I'm seeing that's really beautiful. Especially we run some parent groups, and we collaborate with other organizations, and seeing the parents or caregivers of queer, trans and Two-Spirit youth just ask the questions. So come into safe spaces to ask those questions. I'm struggling. I need some assistance. Great. Let's talk about that. Let's unpack your feelings about it, and then they're going to support their children in whatever that looks like for their youth. And I think that is fantastic. And even though the world is hard and scary, when I see parents and caregivers showing up for their queer, trans and Two-Spirit youth, it is the most phenomenal thing to be accepted and loved and cared for. And there are so many people doing that work. And if that's any of you out there, congratulations, well done. It is so needed. That doesn't happen everywhere.
No.
And the more I see that happen, it does give me hope. It really does. And it really gives me a lot of hope.
It is a wonderful thing to see, and to think I have two children in their teens, and to look at their experience and the people that they have in their lives, and look at how different it was from when I was growing up. It's like you can actually see that progress being made.
Absolutely.
It has happened. I do, want to, talk about also this weekend, what is going to be, wonderful. But it's not just the Pride Parade. There's been so many events going on. Besides the Pride Parade, what events can people go to and check out? Maybe if something as large as the Pride Parade isn't quite what they're comfortable with.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there are a lot of different events for all different intersections of the community. Working where I work, obviously, I'm thinking about some of the community events, and we have programs specific for seniors and also for youth. So we have Aging with Pride, which is a seniors event next week happening in the West End, where folks come together and celebrate, aging, which doesn't often get talked about, especially in
or celebrated, which it should as well.
Absolutely. And then we also, every year, Qmunity has a youth prom as well, which is a dry event where folks come together. It's peer supported as well. And that, again, that information can be found on our social media, but that's later into August. And so it really does, run the gamut. There are so many things for everyone. And I think that is the beauty of this increased inclusion and acceptance, where people think, I'm really into arts and crafts. I'm going to make a specific queer pride event in that vein. Yeah. So I think that we have to celebrate all different forms of queerness and transness and two-spirit identities.
Absolutely, because we do, I think, at times tend to put people in stereotypes and think everybody wants one thing. And we've seen time and time again in any area that is not the truth. Are there other areas, though, that, we're seeing, challenges for the queer and trans and two-spirit communities here?
I mean, absolutely. I think that, on a sort of systems level, the sector, the nonprofit sector is really struggling. We've had some incredibly hard funding cuts because provincial funding just hasn't come through. And a lot of folks are experiencing that. That's not just our organization. But ultimately, I think that the point to make there really is that when that happens, it is queer, trans, and two-spirit seniors and youth that are affected. When those funding restrictions apply, we are not able to potentially operate at full capacity anymore. And, we have had folks message us when we've had these cuts saying, well, hang on, this is my only drop-in group. I'm a senior. I live in the Okanagan, and I'm already driving 45 minutes to go to this drop-in session every week. And you're telling me that you don't have the capacity to do that anymore. Right. And, that's the reality on the ground. And I think that, everyone is hurting financially. And so it's not to say to put this onto individuals, but, systems wide, that is a real, that's a very tangible struggle that, we can talk about obviously other pieces of the puzzle as well, but that's financial resource is a really big one to run an organization and run programs.
It absolutely is. And as you said, it's impacting so many areas, but we need to be very conscious of that, just that single building block, and so much can come from it. It's been so wonderful to have you here, Alex. That's all the time we have for a segment, but I do hope you have a fabulous weekend and enjoy all of the other events that are coming up for the rest of the month.
Thank you so much.
Alex Ash, Programs and Engagement Manager in BC's Queer, Trans, and at Qmunity, BC's Trans Two-Spirit Resource Centre. And it is the first of its kind for Eschatem First Nations. A well-known piece of public art in Vancouver is getting a new home, but as Renee Lucas reports, some residents near the new site will not be rolling out the welcome wagon.
Darlene Forst says from her living room window across Granville Street, she'll be staring directly at Trans Am Rapture.
They're treating our neighborhood as a storage locker for a piece of art they don't know what to do with.
The sculpture, 5 real scrapped cars crushed and stacked atop the trunk of an old-growth cedar, was initially erected near Main Street SkyTrain station in 2014, part of the Vancouver Biennale art exhibition, and meant to stay only 2 years. The piece was eventually removed in 2021 for restoration and birdproofing due to a pigeon infestation, but future deconstruction plans for the Georgia Viaduct mean the sculpture can't go back to its original location. Instead, it will go here, at the south end of the Granville Street Bridge, next to the city centennial marker in Granville Loop Park. Forst says she's concerned about another bird infestation, starting an online petition calling for the decision by the city to be reversed. Marcus Bocott says he created the piece as a comment on consumption culture and how urban life is compounding pressures on the environment.
I mean, our culture is as bereft, I think, in some ways, as our environment is. They called the piece edgy. well, great.
The city says public consultation isn't standard practice when it considers locations for public art. It says it recognizes the subjective nature of art, as not everyone will appreciate a piece in the same way.
We saw the posters go up about 3 weeks ago and looked at it and we thought, really? They're going to stick that so everybody in our neighborhood can see it every morning?
I don't see a problem with the location. I understand it's a statement, like a message. We see messages every day on the street in different spots.
I don't know the negativity towards it. I don't see why it wouldn't be a great spot for it. I'd like to see it not come back.
Forst says she'd like to see the city halt installation of the piece and reassess the project. As for what the artist thinks of the community pushback,
just hang fire, just relax. You know, it's a sculpture. It is, like everything else in life, temporary.
the city says the sculpture will remain in place for at least 10 years. Renee Lucas, CBC News, Vancouver.
And we do have time for a few emails that we have received on yesterday's topic from a seniors advocate, Dan Levitt, talking about the need for more care beds and the impact that that can have on caregivers. We had an email from Erin. She says, my siblings and I had to put our gorgeous mom into 2 care homes as she developed dementia. Parkwood Manor in Maple Ridge was wonderful to our mom. She had to go into a long-term care home as her dementia progressed. Went into Louis Brier for the next 20 years. Also was wonderful to our mom, but some of the care aides were better than others. We saw her every weekend and brought her flowers and treats. The nurses took notice and told us how wonderful it was that we saw our mom and all the time, and some people had no one visiting them, which makes a difference in their lives and care. Our mom celebrated her 95th birthday and called it a day and passed away on October 9th, 2015. Our mom was one of the lucky ones. Her birthday is, or was, August 4th. Thank you so much for that, Erin. And care homes, just getting another email coming in. It said, I'm a baby boomer with my health currently. In the future, if I'm diagnosed with dementia, I will not put my daughters or the system through what is going on now. I will choose MAID or another means. I watched my grandmother go through this for 10 years, lived in a hospital bed for 2 years before getting into long-term care. That is our show for today. Thank you for calling in and joining this discussion. You can always email us, bctoday@cbc.ca.